CSS rule set. This is what it's called. If you ever seen CSS before, you would notice that all of these white text around here is not present. And all of these squares around them, they're not present either. So actually what you see here is just a way of for me to show you what they're called, these things. And now we'll just, diving into what this is. And it's kind of a complex setup, not in all, but it's complex because we want to really introduce you to most of the terminology we use within this CSS rule set. So first off, what is a CSS rule set? It's the whole thing here. Like if you saw the video about HTML, which I hope you have seen, the lecture on that, you know that there's a start tag and there's an end tag. And when I talk about element, I don't talk about only them. The element is the start tag, the end tag, and the content between. So that's the whole element. And this is similar because when we're giving rules, we're writing rules that some element or a lot of elements are supposed to follow. Like, for example, changing color of text or changing size. We write all of that inside a rule set. There could be one rule, there could be many rules inside, but what we would call this thing, the whole thing, is a rule set. So what we need to make a rule set work is a couple of things. First off, you can see this, the first thing that goes here, the green letters, and we have a red or a pinkish one. I think it is called razzmatazz, this kind of pink, actually. And then we have some kind of green text and green text again, and we got the first opening bracket here. If I look at that thing, all of these are actually selectors. So this is a selector. We're using quite a bit of selectors in here in a combination to apply this text on a specific part of our web page. So what we do here, if we just go ahead and look at it, is that the first part of the selector, it says that we're going to whichever element that has the class container on it. So how do I know that? It's because if I put a dot and then write container, I mean class container. So dot stands for class, and what comes immediately after, no space between, immediately after, dot container in this case, it means I'll go to the document and I'll look at all the elements that has this class on it that we've named container. Okay. And then there's a space here. And this space says something as well. So spaces do say something. If we introduce them just haphazardly, we might say nothing would happen. But in this case, it actually does. In selectors, spaces mean something. So space means inside. So we're looking at a P paragraph, and the elements. So there are elements that called P stands for paragraph. We're selecting all P elements inside of some kind of element, all the P elements that are inside of some kind of P element that has the class container. So even now it starts to become a bit complicated to follow, but after a while you get through the reading much more complicated things than this, and you're like, yeah, I get it. It's not hard. But at the beginning, it's a daunting task, I know. And then we have this colon, which is something we use usually for pseudo classes. And then we have pseudo elements. They're usually for the double colons. Doesn't really matter right now. That's just syntax you'll learn across the, along the way. But if we look at pseudo-class, right, what has it said? Well, it says first child. Okay. So we can always see this as a condition. What it says it, if a container now, for example, has more than one element inside of it, so it doesn't only have a P, it has like a lot of elements, just P's and divs and a lot of that. So I only select the P elements that are the first child of the container. Or not of the container. All the P elements that are a first child inside the container. Remember, this means inside the space here. So inside the container. Cool. And then what we further on go select something inside of that paragraph. We're actually selecting the first letter inside that. So we can even go down to letter down here. Not every letter, of course not. Usually this is something, the first letter we use that when we're making something called an anfang, which usually is when we want a letter to take up more space, for example, taking up 2 rows. Like in the beginning of a chapter of a book, a fantasy book or something like that is kind of common. So this whole selector actually is that specific. And that word specific is important because when we talk about specificity later on, it really is an important factor on which rule will be applied. So now we are very specific. We want to go to this letter. Cool. And then we said we've selected this, but what do we want to do with it? Now that comes after this first opening bracket. So in here between, we will have the so-called declaration block. So there could be a couple of declaration in this time it's actually 1, 2, 3 declarations. And all of them are called the declaration block. This is the rule set. This is the declaration block. And it's easy to know then that each part of that declaration block is a declaration. So this whole thing is a declaration. And if you divide this thing up in 2, you'll see that we have the property. That's the first part. That is the properties, the properties that we can give to an element or could change on an element. Most of those, I want you to think about not giving it. I want you to think about changing it. It's much more about changing the property, the value of that property, than actually giving an element of property. So, color, for example. When we see text right off the bat, it's probably black. So we already have a color. We don't give them a new color. We're just changing color. So we don't give them color, we're changing color. In this case, we're typing color and we're actually assigning black. And later on, you'll understand that this stands for black when we're talking about colors. But this is, I could have written white here or pink here or giving it some kind of a hexadecimal value, or there are many ways of doing this. But in that case, I would have changed. Now, I'm only stating that this is the colors. I'm making sure that it is. Maybe it was a different color from the beginning. I don't know. Now we have the property. Again, font size. What this thing is called afterwards, it's in this case up here, it will be called value because it's kind of value. And in this case, it's also a value. But then there are times when you're like, what should I ask? Now, what should I put there in the case of text transform? When I want to maybe have like lowercase, I want to have capitalized, I want to have uppercase, like in this case. it would be unsuitable to put some kind of numeric value there. In these cases, when I'm actually typing text as a value, that value is called a keyword. So the whole thing here, it goes from the start to the end. It's called declaration block. You can see it down here. It's a bit, gone there. And then we have the declarations. And we have these declarations consist always of a property and a value. And sometimes that value is not the proper name of it. It should be there. It should be changed to keyword when it's not a numeric value anymore. It's more like text. That's a keyword. So now we have a way of discussing, the syntax